Good morning. Good morning and welcome to worship. Welcome here this morning. Welcome to those of you who are joining us online. We're glad you're here. As folks are still making their way into the sanctuary, I will just begin our time together with sharing some of the key things that are happening in our congregation and in our church and through the week and in the coming weeks, all part of our life and work at Shantz. So to get us started, I'm going to invite Henry, who has an announcement.
So first of all, thank you to everyone that keeps on coming out to our Friday night games nights. They continue to be well attended and lots of fun with new things appearing every time. This week we had a quilting comforter knotter thing happening, which was awesome, and all sorts of other stuff. Second CAFL announcement, curling is scheduled for March the 17th. Doug Wagner is arranging this and is in charge of that, and do not fear, his broken hand is not from curling. So it is not a dangerous sport, but we need more names on the sheet. We need to get that sheet filled out or Doug will need to cancel. And Doug is prepared to curl left-handed, and I would put money down that his left-handed curling is better than my right-handed curling. So please sign up for that. And then thirdly, I would like to highlight the upcoming Schmen's Breakfast. Some of you have asked what a Schmen's Breakfast is, and that is a legitimate question. I don't know if we've had one before, but before I tell you what to expect, I need to tell you what not to expect. If you saw the plants, the decorations, the centerpieces, the gourmet food, and the perfectly aligned tables yesterday at the women's brunch, that's not gonna happen. With this being our first crack at such event, maybe next time. However, here is what I can tell you about the Schmen's Breakfast. It is on Saturday, March 23rd, and runs from 9 a.m. to 11:30 a.m. There will be food. Some food groups will be covered. A ticket to come is $15, and this includes a +1. You are encouraged to bring a neighbor, a friend, or a relative. Connections will be made. Great conversations will be had. We will have time for informal fellowship. There will also be a formal part. Gord Alton will share from his work as a spiritual care advisor to men that are in palliative care. He has invited them to write down some parting words of wisdom specifically to our group. You will hear words from a doctor, a cook, a police officer, a financial planner, and more. This all fits in within our Schmen Breakfast theme of living with purpose. Gord has shared some of these responses that he's gotten already with myself and with Chad Spalding, and the word profound does not go far enough. The clarity that people have in their last days is clearly evident. Other formal events in the morning will be led by Chad Spalding and myself. We are the Church and Family Life reps that are organizing this event. We are aiming this event for dudes between the ages of 18 and 118. The more intergenerational, the better. Will anything else happen at this Schmen Breakfast morning? Well, we will sing grace before our meal. We will sing a cappella. If it goes well, we might sing again to conclude the morning. And if that goes really well, we might change our name to the Schmeno Singers. If you would like to explore a life with purpose, see me after the service in the atrium and reserve a spot or two.
Thanks, Henry. One of the messages from the beautiful setting that the women were in yesterday was that perfection is not our goal. So, I think it's okay if you don't have perfectly aligned tables or flowers. I'm sure that Schmen's breakfast will be a blessing to everyone there. I have another announcement. I'll highlight it for you. It's in your bulletin about 3/4 of the way down the page, March 2nd. Shantz Mennonite Church Worship Ministry invites you to an evening of Lenten worship, Stations of the Cross, followed by meditative Lenten music, shared by John B. Miller and friends, and of course featuring our own Andrea Weber-Stuckley. And many of you may have attended, I know Andrea referenced it last week, attended the last time that this event happened at Shantz, but it was in the Red Brick Church, and I was present at that event, and that was a beautiful time during Lent for me and for friends that we invited with us, and we found it to be very holy. So I would highly recommend that and look forward to it. And bring friends is the other part of that, just like the Schmen breakfast as well, bring friends. And that's what happened yesterday. Friends came, and I think that that's something that I took away yesterday, and I'm hearing already this morning, and see in the sanctuary, that bringing friends and to share in our joy and the life and work of Shantz is a really key piece of what we do here. So I encourage you to do that. Our last announcement comes from an email that Linda shared. It came from Marisa McCaskill, I hope I'm saying her name correctly, from Habitat for Humanity. And the reason the email came, it's an expression of gratitude and thanks and invitation to our congregation, and it is connected to a Habitat for Humanity initiative that we have contributed to. So I'm just going to read you the email, and we'll end this announcement with a video that Marisa has shared with us. She writes, "The Kale Street community has been 10 years in the making and is the result of incredibly dedicated volunteers and sponsors contributing countless hours and generous funds, all to support local families. Early 2024 marks the end of an era for Habitat Waterloo Region as the final Kale Street family moved into their home a couple of weeks ago. Kale Street is now home to 185 family members, some who have had many years to plant their roots and are seeing the positive results of having a safe and decent place to live, and others who are just beginning their journey towards strength, stability, and self-reliance. And now we're looking forward to celebrating the completion of this amazing project and celebrating the partnership we've had with different organizations over the last 10 years, including Shantz Mennonite Church. The support of our community has been integral to the success of this build. This spring, we'll be hosting our final Kale Street Dedication Day to celebrate these newest families, so please keep an eye out for that invitation in the coming months. And the desire was that we see this video this morning so that we can know a little bit more about that. And it is a video celebrating the partnerships that brought the Kale Street community to life.
We are here. Welcome to Habitat for Humanity Waterloo Region's Kale Street project. The sun is setting on this wonderful project. As of tonight, the last of 45 families will be occupying their unit. Won't be needing this anymore around here. Habitat for Humanity Waterloo Region's been here on Kale Street since 2013, and it's thanks to community partners, donors, and volunteers that we've been able to make this happen. Let me share some numbers with you. This project represents over 10 years, over 10,000 volunteers, and over 220,000 volunteer hours. Remember your own childhood and all the memories and friendships that were made at the playground? That's going to happen right here, thanks to you. Behind this door, children will grow up with a decent and safe place to live, thanks to you. This is the dinette and kitchen where families will gather together in the evening to cook together and share stories about their day. Thanks to you. Just like any other new build, this is the living room, and it's a very important room. This is where the family's going to gather to watch movies together, maybe play some board games. Thanks to you. This is one of the bedrooms. A child is going to use her imagination to make this her very own. Thanks to you. Within these walls is the opportunity for a family to make a better life. Thanks to you.
Wow. We can look forward to a little bit more information about that celebration and how we might participate in that. As I said at the beginning, welcome to worship. All of what we have just shared and heard together is part of our worship. It's part of being here together. As we continue with the rest of our worship service, just a reminder that washrooms and elevator and nursery are out there. There are people who can help you if you need to know where to go. And one of the things that I really appreciate about worship here and that we highlight each week is that there's a puzzle table at the back, there's a coloring table at the back. And, you know, in education, we sometimes think about our kids in our classrooms who appear to not be engaged in learning because they're doing something else. But we know that we can be engaged and still be doing something else. And I really love that we have those options. So if that's helpful for you, know that that's there. Sunday school happens today for everyone at 11. And although our live stream will end, it will start again at 11 o'clock for those joining us. And adults will join here in the sanctuary for a sermon discussion with Pastor Kendall. And just a reminder for parents of children ages junior kindergarten to grade 4 to please bring your children downstairs, sign them in, and then sign them out again at the end. As I was preparing for worship today, a hymn that I could not find in our books, "Be Still and Know That I Am God," was in my mind. And so the words are very simple. They are, "Be still and know that I am God," and it just repeats several times. So I just invite you to hear those words inside your mind and settle into worship. Be still and know that I am God. And I invite you to share in the call to worship with me as it is on the screen. This call to worship comes from Psalm 22, and if you were at the women's brunch yesterday, Psalm 22 will be familiar, as we heard many things about that psalm yesterday. Come, you who seek God, proclaim God's glory.
All you descendants of Jacob and Rachel.
Come.
All who are isolated and feel alone.
Come.
All who are hungry.
Come.
All who wander.
Come.
Come from all ends of the earth.
Come, you who seek God, proclaim God's glory, and walk in faith. And will you pray with me? God, we gather today in praise and thanksgiving. May your eternal loving kindness hold us, guide us, and enfold us with grace. We pray that our worship will reflect your divine love and that those gathered here and at home will be filled with the hope that lies in you. Amen.
Our first song should be on the screen. If not, it is in number 19 in Sing the Journey. There we go. It's a call and response. Please stand if you are able. I will call out, respond. I will call upon the Lord, who is worthy to be praised. So shall I be saved from my enemies. The Lord liveth, and blessed be the rock, and let the God of my salvation be exalted. The Lord liveth, and blessed be the rock, and let the God of my salvation be exalted. All right, lower voices or shmen start. Responded by higher voices. I will call upon the Lord, who is worthy to be praised. So shall I be saved from my enemies. The Lord liveth, and blessed be the rock, and let the God of my salvation be exalted. The Lord liveth, and blessed be the rock, and let the God of my salvation be exalted. One more time, we'll flip to this side. Respond by that side. I will call upon the Lord, who is worthy to be praised. So shall I be saved from my enemies. The Lord liveth, and blessed be the rock, and let the God of my salvation be exalted. The Lord liveth, and blessed be the rock, and let the God of my salvation be exalted. The Lord liveth, and blessed be the rock, and let the God of my salvation be exalted. The Lord liveth, and blessed be the rock, and let the God of my salvation be exalted. Thank you. Next is Great is Thy Faithfulness. And we will sing as it is written. I need the cable. Great is thy faithfulness.
Will you come and follow me if I but call your name? Will you go where you don't know and never be the same? Will you let my love be shown? Will you let my name be known? Will you let my life be grown in you and you in me? Will you leave yourself behind if I but call your name? Will you care for cruel time and never be the same? Will you risk the constant stare? Should your life attract or scare? Will you let me answer prayer in you and you in me? Will you let the blinded see if I but call your name? Will you set the prisoners free and never be the same? Will you kiss the leper's blade and do such as this unseen and admit to what I need in you and you in me? Will you love the you hide if I but call your name? Will you quell the fear inside and never be the same? Will you use the faith you found to reshape the world around? Will my sight and touch and sound in you and you in me? Christ, your summons echo true when you but call my name. Let me turn and follow you and never be the same. In your company alone, where your water footsteps show, us all move and live and grow in you and you in me. Please sing.
We have many gifts. Each of us individually have many gifts that we bring and we bring to God. Sometimes those gifts are gifts of time, sometimes they're gifts of talent, sometimes they are monetary gifts. There is an offering plate at the back if you choose to leave an offering, a monetary offering today, and we know that many do that in other ways as well. I'd like to offer a prayer. Will you join me? On our own, what we have to give God may not seem that it amounts to much in the light of all you have given to us and in the face of so much need. Put together as a congregation, though, what we offer you here in love becomes more, not simply added together, but somehow multiplied in its usefulness. God, we give you these gifts. Bless our gifts this morning, that there will be enough for all. Amen.
Hello, everyone.
Could the children come up, please? Is this working now? There we go. Hey, thanks, guys. So let's see what I have. Hi. In case I get thirsty. Oh, hi. I was already waving at you this morning. Good morning. So, you probably heard some of what's been going on here, and today is about faith. Faith. And I'd ask the audience that's gathered here before me about faith, but I think I only have one person for a response. What does faith mean to you? How would you describe it? Pardon? Happiness. Happiness is faith. That's a pretty good way to sit there and say. So I've kind of looked at some things, and part of, I guess I'm ahead of the story today. And it's kind of like I'm walking along, and I really want to sit there and say to Jesus and God, hey, you walk beside me, and I want to be like you to God. And I have to realize that I have to accept some burdens, and burdens is the wrong word, but I have to walk in the way that Jesus is talking about starting now. Not hedging my bets and saying I could do it later, and we're looking towards salvation at the end, but looking at salvation now as we're walking along. So, faith. Faith, how do you describe faith? How do you sit there and say, hey, I have faith? For me, I know in the years that I was a police officer that I walked along going, God will never give me more than I can handle. So everything that I came across, if I put it in perspective, I had faith that I could handle it because I knew God was there with me, holding me up and helping me go. But sometimes it takes an actual view, seeing something, to see whether or not we have faith. Just in case. And a retriever. So for the people at home, I hope you can hear me. Take the lid off this one. Hold the water. Sure, you can hold the mic. You can tell me what I'm doing. I don't have to. Oh, look at that. I have my own Vanna. And so you know, this is my Vanna. We are married. So this regular egg, not hard-boiled. Just a regular egg. When I take that regular egg, see, that's why I bring other things. Put it in there. That egg sinks. Everyone sees the eggs on the bottom. Now, regular egg, not hard-boiled. I have faith. I know that when God is walking with me, different things can happen. Same egg and water. You just need to have faith. Know that, like what I learned years ago, that I'm going to be able to get rid of some of my burdens and take on, and burdens is the wrong, get rid of some of the stuff that I carry. And as I walk with and accept God into my life and try to live as God has proclaimed and said we should, I have faith in knowing that that egg was going to float today while I was doing this in front of you. Okay, so if we can just bow our heads for a very quick prayer, and it's going to be about faith. God, thank you today for reminding us and going to be hearing more about having faith in you. Having faith that if I accept you, I can pick up my burdens and my cares and worries and walk with you and slowly shed them as I walk and learn from you how to accept and have faith that things are going to work out for me and for the people around me. Amen. Okay, y'all go back. Even if I remove the spoon, it's still funny.
It's amazing. We can have faith even though we can't see. I love that. I love that analogy. Will you join me this morning in a prayer of confession and assurance? It will be on the screen. Trustworthy God, we want to live with faith, yet we worry there will not be enough. We want to believe in your promises, yet we lose hope. We want to follow you, but sometimes the road is too hard.
We confess before you our unbelief, our worry, our hopelessness.
Shape us into a people who will live in faith. Strengthen us so we can deny ourselves, take up your cross, and follow you. Amen. Our scripture this morning comes from Mark chapter 8, verses 31 through 38. He then began, this is coming from the Message version this morning. He then began explaining things to them. It is necessary that the Son of Man proceed to an ordeal of suffering, be tried and found guilty by the elders, high priests, and religion scholars, be killed, and after 3 days rise up alive. He said this simply and clearly, so they couldn't miss it. But Peter grabbed him in protest. Turning and seeing his disciples wavering, wondering what to believe, Jesus confronted Peter. Peter, get out of my way. Satan, get lost. You have no idea how God works. Calling the crowd to join his disciples, he said, anyone who intends to come with me has to let me lead. You're not in the driver's seat. I am. Don't run from suffering. Embrace it. Follow me, and I'll show you how. Self-help is no help at all. Self-sacrifice is the way, my way, to saving yourself, your true self. What good would it do to get everything you want and lose you, the real you? What could you ever trade your soul for? If any of you are embarrassed over me and the way I'm leading you when you get around your fickle and unfocused friends, know that you'll be an even greater embarrassment to the Son of Man when he arrives in all the splendor of God, his Father, with an army of the holy angels. Blessings to you this morning, Kendall.
If any want to become my followers, let them deny themselves and take up their cross and follow me. For those who want to save their life will lose it, and those who lose their life for my sake and for the sake of the gospel will save it. An African-American woman in the mid-50s in the South is sitting on a bus when a white woman asks for her seat. In the segregated system of the time, white people sit at the front and black at the back. If a white person doesn't have an available seat at the front, an African-American is required to give up her seat. This woman knows there will be severe repercussions and possible suffering if she doesn't relinquish her seat, but she also knows that the segregated system is evil and that things need to change. What does it mean for this woman to deny herself, take up her cross, and follow Jesus? A white middle-class man lives a comfortable life and attends a great church. He's convicted that to be Christian means to follow Jesus in discipleship, to try to live your faith. He sees great injustices in society and in the world, but he doesn't see himself as the kind of person to write letters to politicians or go to rallies. He struggles with what it means, what it is for him personally to live out his faith in his context. What does it mean for this man to deny himself, take up his cross, and follow Jesus? A woman moving up in the corporate world has heard sexist comments throughout her career from a variety of coworkers. Now her boss has begun to make sexual innuendos. She feels caught. On one hand, what he's saying is degrading to her. On the other hand, her career might suffer if she stands up to him. It's so much easier to quietly ignore him and just go about her work. But she's seen him do this to other women in the office as well. What does it mean for this woman to deny herself, take up her cross, and follow Jesus? An upper middle class, white heterosexual man has a great job and a family which he adores. During a presentation at his church, he learns of the abuses, or a presentation on Indigenous concerns, he learns of the abuses in the residential school system. He also learns of the problems on some northern reserves caused at least in part by a mining company that's been granted rights on traditional native land. The man remembers that he has shares in that very company that are doing very well. He wonders if perhaps he's been ignoring First Nations issues for too long. What does it mean for this man to deny himself, take up his cross, and follow Jesus? A man who works for a big local company reads through the Bible and discovers faith in Jesus. In Jesus, he's found someone to look up to and a model to follow. This Jesus was a man who had compassion and caring for others and who lived a life of truth and empathetic relationships and was just what he felt he needed. When coworkers see his Bible, he gets mocked for finding religion. This man has trouble standing up for himself. He was abused as a child by his stepfather and has spent most of his life with little sense of self-worth. He learned that his own will and desires were less important than others, and he spent his life putting other people first. So much so that he's often used as a doormat. His relationship with his wife is disintegrating, partly because he's never been able to articulate his own needs well. He knows he needs to stand up for himself, but finds that really hard. What does it mean for this man to deny himself, take up his cross, and follow Jesus? A youth has an opportunity to go on a service trip with his church during spring break. It'll be a chance to get to know more about the inequalities of society and to get in touch with people much less fortunate than himself. But he also has friends who have invited him on a week-long ski trip, and they can't understand why he would even consider the service trip. What does it mean for this youth to deny himself, take up his cross, and follow Jesus? A woman abused as a child is caught in a marriage to an abusive man. She still loves him, and he can be very sweet at times, but when he gets drunk, he abuses her physically and sexually. She feels caught in the cycles of violence. She thinks that maybe it's her fault, and that if she just treats him a little better, he'll change his behavior for the better. They're Christian, and she knows that a marriage is till death do us part. What would people think if she left this man who is so respected at church? Maybe this is just her cross to bear, and she'll need to put up with it. Surely she can change his behavior if she doesn't stand up to him too much. What does it mean for this woman to deny herself, take up her cross, and follow Jesus? I must admit that I had trouble writing the sermon for this week. My mind was going in many different directions. Part of my struggle is evidenced by the different sketches I've just shared with you. Each of us comes to discipleship, to following Jesus, from a different place and a different context. There is no one-size-fits-all answer to what our text is about. Part of my struggle is also that in today's scripture reading, we begin to come face to face with the cross of Jesus. It's not an easy place for his disciples or for us to go. And yet much of the Gospel of Mark focuses his life and the life of being a follower of Jesus through the lens of the cross. Next week, we'll hear about the foolishness and wisdom of the cross in the writings of Paul in 1 Corinthians. But today, we'll spend some more time on this hard question. Jesus says, if any want to become my followers, let them deny themselves and take up their cross and follow me. So what does that mean for each one of us? What does it mean to deny yourself, take up your cross, and follow Jesus? Let's spend a bit of time with the context of that. This line comes immediately after the first of 3 instances in the Gospel of Mark where Jesus predicts his death and resurrection. After each of them, his disciples do or say something which makes it clear that they don't understand what it means to be Messiah, or that what it means to be Messiah is going to lead not to immediate glory, but to the cross. In the third instance, Jesus predicts his death, and immediately James and John approach him and ask whether they might sit on his right and left hand in glory. In the second case, after Jesus predicts that he'll be killed and then rise again, the disciples have a discussion among themselves about who is greatest. The first prediction is from our text for today. It comes immediately after Jesus asked the disciples this question: "Who do you say that I am?" On behalf of them all, Peter answers, "You are the Messiah." I'm sure the disciples were thinking that great things were in store for Jesus and for them. Jesus had been doing amazing things, astounding people with his teaching and with his healing, feeding multitudes, challenging authority. Crowds were gathering around him, and his fame was growing. When Peter declares that Jesus is the Messiah, he's thinking of glory and fame and power. He's thinking revolution. And Jesus tells them what is really in store when they follow this Messiah. The Son of Humanity must undergo great suffering and be rejected by the elders, the chief priests, and the scribes, and be killed, and after 3 days rise again. Jesus includes the resurrection when he predicts his death. The two are linked. There's no crucifixion without resurrection, and no resurrection without crucifixion. But for Jesus, the path to the resurrection is via the cross. Peter takes him aside to rebuke him. Surely this is not going to happen to the Messiah. Now is the time for the Messiah to step forth in might and in fame and in power. And instead, Jesus begins to talk about suffering and rejection and death. This isn't what Peter signed up for. So he rebukes Jesus. But Peter, like I think is so often the case, is misunderstanding messiahship. He's misunderstanding what it means to follow a Messiah. And Jesus in turn rebukes Peter and tells him to get behind him. Get behind him in the place of discipleship, in the path of discipleship. And then he tells the disciples a little bit more about that path of discipleship. If any want to become my followers, let them deny themselves and take up their cross and follow me. For those who want to save their life will lose it, and those who lose their life for my sake and for the sake of the gospel will save it. This is not a triumphalist message. These aren't the words of a Savior who dies for our sins so that we might be saved by an individual private faith. This is reminding us that being Christian, following Jesus, can be costly. We're following a Messiah who was abused and killed in an evil act because of his very public condemnation of the religious and political authorities of the day. Yes, there's resurrection. Yes, Jesus talks about saving our lives, saving our very souls. The cross is never separated from the resurrection. But resurrection is never separated from the reality of the cross either. One of the things that I really noticed when I was living in Indiana for a couple years was how churches didn't mark Good Friday. They didn't worship on Good Friday for the most part. Good Friday wasn't a public holiday, and most churches didn't then mark or celebrate or worship on Good Friday at all. So they went, worship-wise, often from the high of Palm Sunday to the high of Easter without entering into the passion and death of Jesus at all. But this isn't the Gospel of Mark. In Mark, crucifixion and resurrection go together. And discipleship is central to what it means to follow Jesus. So, a few things that I think this isn't saying. Denying yourself and taking up your cross is not about stoically enduring the burdens and pains of life. In our society, you may have heard the phrase, that's my cross to bear, or some such, or maybe that's just your cross to bear. And that's often used just for any suffering or we experience or any inconvenience in our life. But this takes it out of the context and focuses on suffering rather than on following Jesus. And this is really about following Jesus. It's not about suffering for the sake of suffering. It's about following Jesus. Bearing one's cross doesn't necessarily have to do with suffering. It certainly doesn't have to do with the suffering that comes to most of us just as part of life. For the Romans, the cross was a means of execution for political crimes. It was a way of degrading and humiliating a person as well as killing them. Crucifixion of Jesus came as a result of the way that Jesus lived, prioritizing people, creating community, breaking down barriers, challenging inequities, and encouraging others to do the same. He challenged the political and religious authorities when they got in the way of just and restorative living, and this led him on the path to the cross. For him, this path did lead to suffering, and it certainly could for those who follow Jesus, for those who choose to become Jesus followers. Following Jesus can lead to suffering. But taking up your cross isn't primarily about suffering. In fact, throughout the Gospel of Mark, Jesus has been relieving suffering, healing the sick, feeding the hungry, calming the storm. Suffering itself is not a good thing. Suffering itself is not a redemptive thing. So what do the words of Jesus mean? If any want to become my followers, let them deny themselves and take up their cross and follow me. Jesus does not tell his disciples to deny something, but to deny the primacy of self. Take up your cross means to set oneself on the same path or trajectory of Jesus, to follow Jesus. It means to accept and assert God's claim on one's life, to open yourself to being defined by your faith in Christ. Cross-carrying means saying yes to God, yes to whatever it might be that discipleship road demands of each one of us. The discipleship which these imperatives describe is a lifelong journey of allowing Jesus' identity to shape our own. Active verbs, take up your cross, follow me. This is about where Jesus goes, about doing the kinds of things that Jesus did. It's not really about belief systems, but about being shaped by what you do. But I also want to be careful to say denying yourself is not about abandoning all sense of self, I don't think. It's not about adopting the posture of a doormat, of putting yourself last no matter the circumstances, of allowing others to take advantage of you or abuse you. This is the danger, I think, of this passage and how it's sometimes been used. This is why I included 2 stories of people who had been abused in my opening character sketches. Part of what it means to be abused is to lose some sense of yourself to the evil of the abuse. If you've been abused, to be told to sacrifice self can easily mean to be told to continue to accept the abuse, continue to accept dehumanizing, continue to stand up for the abuser rather than for yourself. And I don't think this is what Jesus means by deny yourself. I think it's more about claiming something, about having yourself shaped by the activity of following Jesus. It's about rejecting the things that get in the way of that path. And I think this means something different for different people in different situations. It isn't one size fits all. In my opening sketches, I think the answer is different for each person, depending on their reality in their life. Both the things that block us from discipleship and the path of the cross laid out before us are different for each one of us. Shortly after the last time that Jesus predicts his death, we have the story of the healing of Bartimaeus, a blind beggar. It's one of the stories that I really love. And here's a man who's at the bottom of the heap. He's been pushed down by the shame of his condition. People avoid looking at him as they pass him by, perhaps giving him some coins, perhaps not. He's outcast. He's destitute. And it must have taken incredible courage for him to speak up and shout out, "Jesus, Son of David, have mercy on me." And those around him shush him and say, "Don't bother Jesus." And he's being shushed, and he stands up and shouts out again, "Jesus, Son of David, have mercy on me." And he calls out to Jesus, and Jesus hears. And he invites him to come and asks him what he wants and heals him because of his great faith. Bartimaeus regains his sight and follows Jesus on the way. And for this blind beggar, to deny himself, take up his cross, and follow Jesus was to reject his shame, reject the bad opinions of others, reject his own sense of worthlessness, and shout out to Jesus, claiming the healing and restoration, claiming the self that Jesus was offering. And I'm going to repeat that because I think it's really important. For this blind beggar to deny himself, take up his cross, and follow Jesus was to reject his shame, reject the bad opinions of others, reject his own sense of worthlessness, and shout out to Jesus, claiming the healing and restoration, claiming the self that Jesus was offering. And then in claiming that, following on the way with Jesus wherever that way might lead. So what does it mean for you to deny yourself, take up your cross, and follow Jesus? I hope that that's a challenge. This isn't a text with easy answers, I don't think. I think it's a challenge for each one of us in our Christian life. What does it mean to follow Jesus? What does it mean to follow after? What does it mean for you to follow Jesus, to take up your cross? Even if sometimes that might mean something harder in life. I hope you've been pushed to think about the Christian formation that comes by following in Jesus' footsteps, by getting out and living your faith, by allowing your very faith to be shaped and formed by the way of Jesus. In Egypt, every Christian gets a little tattoo, usually on their wrist, sometimes on their hand, on the base of the thumb. And it's injected in there is a small blue cross. And if you're Christian in Egypt, it's really easy to tell that you're Christian. You're wearing it on your hand. This isn't a mark of beauty or a fashion statement. It's a commitment. To have that cross in your hand means you're part of maybe a 10% of the population minority. It means that you're one of a group that has spent the last 1,400 years on and off again persecuted for your faith. It means that you'll probably be discriminated against in one way or another. And it means that violence is possible against you. And yet Egyptian Christians all place permanent tattoos of a cross on their wrists or on their hand, telling the world that they are followers of Jesus, that they're followers of Christ, that they're on the path of discipleship. May each of us find the path of discipleship, the individual path, the path that is for each one of us, the path of the cross that is laid out before us. Amen.
Thank you, Kendall. I'm not sure about the rest of you, but I don't come to church for easy answers. I don't think I'd come if we had them. Easy answers turn me off. Thank you for challenging us. If you didn't feel challenged today, I don't know how to answer that, but if you didn't feel challenged today, Our song of response, I believe, is new. It was new to me. So I think we'll stay seated for this. We'll put it up on the screen if you like the hymnal. It's number 302. We don't have a pianist, so and it's hard to plunk out the melody on a guitar, so I will sing through verse 1, and then please join me in verse 1, 2, and 3. Unless a grain of wheat falls to the earth and dies, it remains only a grain of wheat, and never a blade shall rise. For the grain of wheat produces much fruit, but only if it dies. Unless a grain of wheat falls to the earth, never the blade shall rise. Please join me. Unless a grain of wheat falls to the earth, and dies, it remains only a grain of wheat, and never the blade shall rise. For the grain of wheat produces much fruit, but only if it dies. Unless a grain of wheat falls to the earth, never the blade shall rise. The one who loves the worldly life loses the life so near, while the one who hates the life in this world preserves in life eternal. For the grain of wheat produces much fruit, but only if it dies. Unless a grain of wheat falls to the earth, never the blade shall rise. If anyone would serve me, come and follow me. Come and follow me wherever I am. There will my servant be. For the grain of wheat produces much fruit, but only if it dies. Unless a grain of wheat falls to the earth, never the blade shall rise.
We've come to the time in our service where we are going to send those who are worshiping with us online off with a blessing and an invitation to return at 11 o'clock for our Sunday school hour, if you wish. As you go, may you leave today knowing that God has the power to do what God has promised. If we follow Jesus. May you be strengthened in your faith by God's promise. You are loved by God. Amen.
That happening, and it's made a difference. And I can notice the difference in smell, actually. I can. Like, you could always smell the new smell in the building and in the hallways and stuff, and that's starting to dissipate. So why don't we get started with a few but mighty here. So this is one of those, I mean, I focused, in that whole thing, I focused on this one line. I could have focused, I mean, the next line, those two lines are really challenging. The next one, those who want to save their life will lose it, those who, whatever. I sometimes get it mixed up, but that losing and saving stuff, that's just, it's all really challenging stuff, right? It's some of the hardest stuff that Jesus said, I think, to really, especially in our cultural time, because one of the differences for us and for Christians for the last quite a while is that we haven't been persecuted. We haven't been forced to necessarily, I mean, one could debate that maybe, necessarily choose between being faithful and what that might all bring and not being faithful, and it may not matter consequence-wise, right? That might be shifting, and I think it's still true that how we choose our faith, sometimes following Jesus does mean choosing. I mean, one of the sketches was like choosing how we invest. Maybe that affects, right? And that might affect the bottom line or whatever, right? There are differences. So what does it mean for you? What has it, have there been times, Charlene asked me this, Charlene was preaching on the same passage this morning as well in Elmira, and she was asking me last night, she was a bit later in finishing her sermon. We have different patterns around that. But she was asking me so kind of name a time in your life where you've taken up your cross and followed Jesus. And it's actually a hard question, right? And so I'm kind of throwing that out, either what has that looked like for you, or what might it look like for you, or what might it look like generally for Christians in our day and age? You can answer any of those depending how personal you want to be about it. Or other directions that this message took you this morning. Yeah.
When I started off in life, you went to a Mennonite church. Your school, probably half or more, were Mennonite or Amish Mennonite. You went to Arlo Oxford High School. Probably half were Amish Mennonite or Mennonite. So you didn't get tempered. You worked at home in the farm. You still didn't get tempered. And then when I went to work for this huge construction company of 350 men, and I started off running the air hammer, and the language and the atmosphere was a lot different. And yeah, you didn't need but it was not tempting, but it was the world. I was never, like if you're at home in the farm, you don't see the world. But I'd get to 2 or 3 different contractors in a day, and you've seen how guys lose it, yeah. And that's when you first see how the real world is.
And in that in that setting, did you feel any or consequences, or feel it like, yeah?
In fact, they used to call me the Amishman, and that was just, yeah. I was a farmer, and I was a Mennonite, and they called me the Amishman, and nobody ridiculed me about it, but that was then. I don't know, probably not now neither. Depends on how you took it. I didn't take it as, I took it as a compliment, that's right.
I remember, sorry, I'll get to you. When I was a kid, I didn't ever swear. And I had some friends who swore prolifically. And I didn't, whatever, I just didn't. And but one time, these two of my best neighborhood friends decided they wanted to have a contest to see who could kind of last longest without swearing between the two of them. And I was to be the judge because they knew that I didn't swear, right? So again, there wasn't consequence to me. That was part of my, I think, a grunt of my Christian faith or whatever, not wanting to. And there was respect there for that from these friends.
For me, it was actually more around relationships. I've always sought relationships, to maintain relationships, that sort of thing. And I just, I guess to bear the cross, for me, it was more around sitting with that outcast person, right? When as a kid, you would have kids who make fun of other kids, and it's just kind of making that stand, and it could backfire, but it was more important for me at least, to maintain relationships with everyone, turning the other cheek, even though treated poorly. It's just about what is the right thing to do, and keep pushing even though it could hurt. Yeah.
Where else do you want to go with this?
Just trying to think of examples of what we're talking about here. Like I remember doing what you're doing, Chad, right? Yeah. Chad, like on the school bus. Like the school bus dynamics were just brutal. And I remember in grade 9, I was on the bottom end, and so I got totally scrunched and all the rest of it. But when I got into grade 11, 12, I actually sat with people who were getting treated that way, so that wouldn't happen, right? And and I didn't care what people thought. I felt so wrong, and so that was one place. There was definitely a cost in the bus a little bit, but I just ignored it. As I get into adult years, it's kind of interesting where the stretching has been for me around this area. Like I'm not a big drinker, so I remember that I find there's different cultures. I remember when I started curling, there's a whole dynamic, not within the clergy club, but but we went to other curling clubs, like for Bonspiel. It's wholly different culture. The jokes are they're just way out of line, but that was their humor. And so our jokes were always, Morris would share a clean joke, Morris Martin would. But all the jokes are just awful. It's a different culture, right? And in the areas where I've been pushed personally, it's more around the other way. We're pushing me to be friend. I remember when I visited my first guy on Discovery, he was a drag queen. That was really outside my comfort zone. That's where I've got pushed to be more inclusive, right, with people who are often judged or seen as judged by others. So that's been my growing area. That's why I became friends with the Muslims, and it's been constantly pushing the edge of what we would say, quote, as Christian almost. But the Christian thing is to be loving toward these people. But I wasn't brought up that way. We had more, not brought up to judge them, but it was more separation. I don't know about you. I grew up with separation between Catholics and Protestants in my younger days, and it disappeared during my generation, but it was very distinct in my parents' generation. Very distinct. So that's been my journey, just how to be more inclusive, to be loving toward those where culture tends to judge. That's been my growing edge throughout my ministry, I would say.
Sorry, I do have a question actually, and it's what you were preaching about. You're talking about Egypt and putting the cross, and that really spoke to me, and it stuck with me, because my initial reaction was, why would you do that? Why would you intentionally put yourself out to be persecuted, that sort of thing, when all you have to do is not do that, still follow Jesus, and you're okay? And then it kind of occurred that maybe that is what Jesus is looking for, right? It's the don't deny me, in fear. I'm assuming that's the message that is, or that it would be the purpose of doing that sort of thing.
Yeah, I think it's very much a claiming this identity and being clear about it. It's also in some ways a pass into places. Right, so like into churches, or especially like into the big cathedral or something, you either need to have a cross on your hand or you need to be white. It becomes a boundary issue, and right? So so this person is safe to let into the Christian space or whatever. So it's that as well. It's kind of both of those things, but with some real consequences, for sure.
What would it look like for me to have a cross here? That people noticed it, right? Right, and therefore, your words could carry a different weight. I think if people knew you were as a Christian, like I see in our time right now, we as Christians got to find a way to help people talk about politics without judging. Yeah, right. We got to find a way that we can talk to conservatives, progressives, whatever, in ways which we can learn from one another and grow from one another, rather than you're that and I'm this and we're not going to talk. Like, to me, the Christian thing is to find that middle ground of conversation where there's no judgment. But if I don't have a cross here when I'm doing that, they would never know I'm a Christian. Like, how would people know let's say, I believe that. We should nurture that. But if I did, they would say, this is a gourd thing, not a Christian thing. Right? So it makes me wonder, there may be value in us having symbols that we have, which people notice that indicate we are who we are.
And one of the challenges, I think, is often that a cross has become also like people wear a cross just as a fashion thing, right? So it's, in our society, has lost some of those things, right? That it's not necessarily, yeah?
Then people in Egypt, when they had that cross, when you said something, my wife said, "Mark of the beast." That's the first thing that comes to my mind, but I wasn't going to say it. Secondly, are they called Copto-Christians, like that big church on Ottawa Street? Now, would them Copto-Christians over here, would they have that mark of the, would they have that cross on their wrist?
Likely, so it's Coptic. It's in Coptic, what it really means is Egyptian. And so and there's Coptic Orthodox, and that big church would be Coptic Orthodox probably, which is one of the streams of Orthodoxy that there's not, but there's Coptic Evangelical, a whole range. Yeah. And so in Egypt, about 10% of the population is Christian, and about 10% of those would be, and 90% of those would be Orthodox, those Christians. And then about 10% would be a variety of Evangelical.
They were really being persecuted, like they were slaughtering a lot of them over there. And I know when I went to this church, I thought, holy cats, these people got money. Like, I mean, this is a massive, huge thing. And then you can tell by the building of it that money was no object.
Yeah, I mean, I think within the Coptic world, it would be the same as within any other, that there are those that have money and those that don't. But yes, there's certainly, and it's the kind of thing where there's not always persecution. There's not always problems. Sometimes there are. When I was there, it was largely more that there'd be discrimination kind of stuff, right? You wouldn't get the job because you were a Christian or whatever. But those kind of things that are harder to prove that are problematic or whatever. But there was more of that kind of stuff. There had been, and in Upper Egypt in the south, there had been more violence not too long before. And the churches have walls and gates. And when I was there would be soldiers stationed kind of just to the side of the entrance. There were always, with the Christian, there was a little station for soldiers. And then there was a Christian doorkeeper, and then soldiers. I don't know if they were always Christian or not, but they were there to protect the church from the violence. Yeah. So I'd always walk by the soldiers. I lived inside one of the buildings in one of the compounds, so I'd always walk by the soldiers and then into the compound. Yeah. But that's one of the. I think this whole discussion sounds different in Canada than it does in some parts of the world in some places, right? Where it's harder to face consequences for our actions. Like I do think about some people that some Mennonites who went to the capital in the U.S. and sang for peace in Gaza and were arrested for that or whatever. That sometimes there are consequences, but you have to work harder to actually have consequences. Were you going to say something?
Yeah, I was just curious because I mean I'm stuck on your question of what does it mean to you to bear the cross, right? And I think I've lived a fairly privileged life, growing up in KW, and being Christian is easy, right? And I feel like I've reaped rewards from it. I have not been persecuted a lot, maybe a little bit here and there, but nothing like the rest of the world can. And so it makes me question, am I doing enough? You know, so I almost feel like you were saying that bearing the cross is not about suffering or only suffering. But it makes me question, if I have not experienced suffering due to this, does that mean I'm not doing enough? You know, maybe I should be pushing more and challenging those around me, and you know, walking that line that could cause repercussions as opposed to living in safety. I know that's where I could grow, is that comfort zone, but yeah.
It's a good question.
So growing up in my life, my story is my dad was Old Order Mennonite from Hawksville, moved to Elmira. When he was 17, he would walk past Elmira Mennonite Church, go to the Old Order Church, and he was 17 and he saw all the boys with their cars, and so he went to his dad and said, I want a car. So this was before he was 18, when he would have, the whole group of 18-year-old young people in their church would get baptized, and then you're pretty much committed to living the life, the rest of your life as an Old Order Mennonite. But Dad changed to the Red Brick Church. So I never lived the Old Order Church life, but Dad had one brother out of the 6 of the siblings that stayed Old Order because Grandma and Grandpa Old Order had to have a sibling or child, somebody to look after them in their old life. So Uncle Clayton and Aunt Lizzie stayed Old Order, built the Dottie house onto the house, and Grandma and Grandpa lived there. And then Dad's brother Gordon left the Old Order Church to go to the Markham Mennonite with the black cars. So we would visit a lot, our family. But we had the television, and we girls cut our hair. And when I was 12, I did get baptized in the Mennonite church in Glen Allen, wore a covering. Then, when I was 13, Dad moved the 10 of us to Chatham. We went to Missionary Alliance Church. There was nobody that wore a covering down there. There was no Mennonite church in Chatham. So us 3 oldest girls that wore coverings, eventually, just in a few months, like, Mom, there's nobody down here that wears a covering. So we 3 took our coverings off. Mom wore hers all the time. But when I lived up here then, I was 21 when I moved up to Kitchener, I worked at KW Optical, where I made lenses for the frames for glasses. And there was a Muslim lady, and we called her Bibi. And I don't know, I was attracted to this woman somehow, that we got to know each other in the 5 years that I worked there. And different times, I remember growing up saying, you don't have to be out preaching. It's your lifestyle, it's your words. And I never swore either, I don't swear. And it's how you present yourself and how you are God's skin, right? You've probably heard that. Maybe I'm not even saying right, but we're God with skin on. Thank you. And but in the 5 years that I worked there were different times that my supervisor, Tim, he somehow sensed that I was a Christian. I remember something happening, and I can't remember what it was, but it was something Christian. And he came to me and he said, "What do you think about this, Sheila?" And so I forget what I said, but it was definitely, I knew that just by me being me affected those that I worked with. But if there is persecution in my life, it was with BB, because one day she needed a ride home from work, and I drove her home. She gets in the house, and she calls her brother, who is a minister in the, or a priest in the Muslim church. He was there in seconds, and he was at me, how I've read your Bible, and it's so contradictory of itself, and la 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 la. And I'd never been in this situation in my life. So pretty much what I said was, you know, I believe in Jesus. You don't believe, well, they believed there was a Jesus, but he was a prophet. And so basically what I said was, you know, I'm going to live my life on this earth as a Christian, and you're going to live your life as a Muslim. And then someday we'll find out, basically. But I said, I cannot argue with you. But if that was persecution, and so I hope I dealt with it well enough. But Bibi and I, we continued a good relationship until I left. But my life is easy living as a Christian, but how does that question, say it again, how what does bearing cross mean? And then, but I also have to admit, at times, is living a Christian life easy, because if I see a situation where maybe I should step forward, I can stand back and not say anything, that I don't have to show that I'm a Christian. But I've heard many times, you can be a Christian standing in the line at a grocery store. I've heard this over and over. That how do you deal with, you know, somebody in the line that's just antsy or whatever, and smiling at somebody. I have this paper that Rhonda has, and it says, everyone smiles in the same language. And isn't that true? I can smile at somebody, and they smile back. It doesn't matter who they are. They smile back. And I think that's one way I want to say I'm Jesus in the flesh, is because I can smile and just show them that they're noticed, right? Anyway, that's my story.
I kind of joined a little late, but I was wondering, based on the sermon today, about what about persecution based on false assumptions or gossip, persecution based on disbelief, persecution based on a bureaucracy that doesn't work, persecution based in, well, some examples are legal system or any of the so-called systems that profess to help people but actually really persecute and undermine them. What about those? Like, you'd have to go through these processes because you're part of a society, but in some ways you're persecuted by them.
Yeah, I mean, to me, this has to do with following our faith in Jesus, right? And so it's, I don't think we're talking about persecution in general. We're talking about what does it mean to follow Jesus that might lead to consequences, doesn't always. And what does that look like in our society? That's not to say that there aren't problems with systems and how they, and in fact, I will tell that story because a few days ago, so we back in September got letters in the mail, very official letters for someone that came to our address. We didn't know who they were. We kept them because they looked official, but we didn't know where they were from. So a few days, sometime last week, this Ethiopian woman came and knocked on our door, and she was wondering whether we had her permanent residence documents. And she had been waiting since September for these. We had no idea who to give them to, and in that moment, actually, I didn't know exactly where they were. It took us a moment to find them again, or it took us a few days to find them again. But she'd called, and they'd sent the documents to the wrong address, and they were telling her that she'd need to reapply and go through the 2-year process, right? And we were saying, well, no, we're going to support you in this. If we can't find these documents, we will, because that's not right? But there's a system that is responding poorly to some people that really need that system to work well. Yeah. Sure, there's systemic things, and one of the questions is, as Christians, if we're living Christian lives, how do we interact with the systems? And that's part of the problem for Jesus, was he interacted with systems in ways that caused them to respond to him in negative ways, right? And so what does that look like? Are there ways that we should be challenging systems differently or not? Is that part of what it means at this point to follow Jesus, to take up the cross? It's a hard question.
So, like in the examples where people have encountered injustice or persecution, or the truth is not clear, people are basing things on false evidence or that type of thing. In that situation, then, what does it mean for the individual person? I guess because you can't make a system change. A system is a stagnant thing. It's not really, I think, stagnant. It sort of grows, but yeah, that's a very confusing thing, because people can be caught or trapped, like you mentioned your example, but then there are individual people that can be, like you mentioned about Rosa Parks. That was, but then people stand up and they say something about it, or they try and buck against that injustice or that viewpoint that may be nothing more than written gossip, right? That you put something in writing, all of a sudden people say it's true, but it may not actually be true, because there may have been the context missing, like the context of Rosa Parks, and like when we look back at in history. So I'm not really sure when you say that, to deny and I'm sort of just a little fuzzy on that kind of thing. Does it just mean just keep sort of pushing against the system and hoping that the system will change, or just kind of ignoring it and kind of just, carrying on and just, sort of, I don't know.
I think it's really important, and this is not to challenge you, Rhonda, but I think it's really important that the information that we get when we're in those kinds of situations, it's important that we look for more sources of information so that we make sure that we have the context that's required. But as Kendall said earlier, what we're talking about here now is about the persecution potentially of being a follower of Jesus. And I think what we're called to be as followers of Jesus is we're called to be discerning and open and alert for opportunities where we can be supportive of individuals in situations, sometimes of their own making or sometimes not. But again, the tribulation that Kendall spoke about today in his sermon was, what happens as Christians. And I agree that it's not very hard to be a Christian in our society, but I see that changing. Maybe not in my lifetime. Depends if Jesus waits to come back or not. Because as we get more, there's just less and less of a biblical Judeo-Christian influence in our society, just because of we have lots of wonderful people that are immigrating to Canada and they're looking for a safe place to live, and that's awesome. But they don't have that background, and so that puts more pressure on us to live our lives and shine our light as bright as we can. But that's really, and I'm going to change my tone slightly here, I think that as I grew up in Mennonite church, it was all about, not so much the fire and brimstone, but it was all about, we have to tell people and we have to bring them to Jesus. And yet when you listen to or read what Paul wrote, he talked about one person watering, another person, first planting and then watering and trimming and stuff. And it's the Spirit that moves people to Jesus. It's not us. And that takes a lot of pressure off of me, right? Because I used to think, man, I have to go and witness to that person. And what am I going to say? I don't even know him. Well, that's the worst thing, because unless it's really clear that the Spirit's guiding you, that's not the way to do it. That brings persecution. So I think if we can maintain our relationship with Jesus and we maintain our openness for His Spirit to guide. We may have some difficulty, but is it John 16:33 talks about, in this world you will have tribulation, but I am here to overcome the world. This is what Jesus said. That's what we have to carry, and so that's how we do it.
I want to just come back to Gord, because you had your hand up a while ago, and it's...
I was just thinking of another example of me trying to be a Christian, and it comes in pickleball, because in pickleball there's one of the people I play with, and he does not like me, because when I play with him we always lose, and I played with him again this week, and I was not playing my best, and I'm sure I caused 4 points, and so I apologize, and I'm sorry that I probably gave up 4 points, and he said, "Oh, you gave up the whole game, Gord." And I didn't know. I said, "Well, no, it wasn't as bad as you say it is," and I just left it at that. But I have learned. But he's a person I have learned to keep coming here, and I always say hi to him, and I try to be nice to him, and so on. And that's that's the tension I live with, trying to be Christian to him with the hope that maybe he'll begin to own the fact that, it's not all about winning, and also it's about relationship and having fun together. At least that's my hope is. And yes, we win some, we lose some. But it's not all about winning. But for him, it is about winning. And I've experienced this attitude many times from him, and I just live with it. But this time I spoke up. And that, for me, was a new step for me.
I'm going to go to some people who haven't spoken.
Hi, so I'm Marie. I really appreciated, in response to what Gord just said, when you mentioned and underlined, it's not about denying us. Because in the church I grew up in, and the environment that I grew up in, that was it. You always put yourself second and last, and you don't take care of yourself, and you push, push, push. And not surprisingly, I end up with health issues in my middle age. And I've had to learn that you can still stand up for yourself. And I knew that before too. I'm not saying I didn't. And I'm not saying I didn't, but I think it's important. It's an important message that we can still learn to stand our ground and reply. It's confusing. It's hard. I was saying to Kendall, because I listened online to the sermon, and I thought, wow, this is a hard. I'm coming to church today for the first time, or the building, and wow, it was a wonderful sermon. Wonderful sermon. So much. I'm going to ask for a copy so I can read everything. And for me, what struck me is actually following Jesus for me has come to mean letting go of controlling the outcome of things. Because the environment I grew up in, I needed to control. And the church I grew up in, it was control, right? It was all controlled. And this is, you say this prayer, do A, B, and C, you get back, then you do all the right things. Although they didn't say that. They were saying that, but that was the underlying message. So I've had to learn to let go of the control of outcome of things, and then beautiful things happen, actually, because you're not then things come to you that your faith opens that door, right? Because I'm not trying to control and you're noticing opportunities. What can I do? So what can I do with my limited abilities right now? And God has opened doors for that to happen.
Wow, there was a lot of really interesting stuff in what you just said.
I have two stories, and I'm afraid that they start out like things, but for Gord, when I first started policing, we worked on different platoons, and I'm very gregarious in saying, "Hi, Tom," on a different platoon. For an entire year when we worked different shifts and he would come in and I was on an overlap, I go, "Hey, Tom, how's it going?" "Hi, Tom." Nothing ever came back from him. After about a year, I sat there and said, "Hey, you know what? Forget this. Forget this. I'm not saying hi, Tom." He never answers. I never make a foot forward with him. So I didn't say, "Hi, Tom." And I got, "Hi, Steve." And I go, Tom, did you just say hi to me? And he said yes, but he was so introverted that it was very difficult for him. And if we continue to just, like you were saying, you felt and you said, hey, sorry I cost at least like the 4 points. You've made that, yeah. Yeah, like, right? So you continue to walk forward, or you continue to go forward and try. And I think that's what we're called to do, is continue to go forward and do it. The second one was, my coach officer was an amazingly intelligent individual. And I was so fortunate and blessed to have him in my life, because he taught me something really important, and it's about court. So in court, I was responsible for bringing everything to court. I did the investigation to the best of my abilities. I did everything else that was there. I prepared all the paperwork. I prepped all my witnesses, and I was responsible to court. What occurred at court was no longer my responsibility. So learning that we can stand back and say, I have done everything possible that I can. Now it's up to someone else. And that's where I think we can keep some of our sanity in realizing I have done everything I can to walk in the footsteps. And now it's up to, and I don't want to use the word judgment, but it's up to God to take it that last little bit. You know, and I know, I'm sorry, I'm going to go different. All of us will have different opinions on things. All of us have different stances because of where we've grown up, what's happened and occurred in our life. And it's okay for people to come up with different opinions and challenge where I am standing, and I don't mind that. Or because it's okay to be pushed, to say, tell me why you are like this, or have you thought about this? So I think that causes growth.
It's Tammy. When I was choosing the version of the scripture to read today, I read 3. I think I read the NIV version, I read the Good News version, and the Message version, and then the one that I landed on was the Message version. And I think the reason I landed on that one is because in verses 34 through 37, there was it seemed like just super clear in plain language. And it reminded me a lot of things that Terry says, you know, in terms of we're putting it in gear, and the boat in gear, and then we're getting out of the way, right? And it's where Jesus says, anyone who intends to come with me has to let me lead. You're not in the driver's seat, I am. And I is italicized in this version, you know, for emphasis. And then the next part says, don't run from suffering, embrace it. And I struggled with that part yesterday. I thought, okay, well, like we all have a fight or flight response where we want to flee from suffering. It's just human nature. Embrace it. And I wondered if that actually meant just like be in it and then have the faith that Jesus, God, is leading, and that we maybe don't have control over the outcome. And that's the hard part, right? That's the hard part for all of us all the time, and having that faith, even though we can't see God, couldn't see the salt in the jar this morning that made the egg float, but we had to have faith that it was there. Yeah, so anyway, I just wanted to highlight that part of that scripture this morning, and the simplicity of it, even though we know the answers are much more complex. And the only other thought that I had was something that I learned from Henry Winter. I think it was about 2 years ago. And I don't remember if it was during a sermon that he did. I think it might have been. And he really challenged my thinking about the word Christian, and that he, in his own thinking, had been shifting from identifying as being a Christian to being a follower of Christ. And that's that really, really resonated with me and has stayed with me. And I think that when we do that, that's the part maybe that we're talking about how we, maybe Terry, about what you were saying about the pressure off, just how we live our life and maybe sharing God's love and the gospel and the word isn't about reading scriptures to people. It's not about those kinds of things, but it's about how we show up in the world and how would Jesus. It may include those things, but we don't have to lead with that, right? And that when we're leading as Jesus lived, like, okay, what did that look like? What did it sound like? How did it make people feel? And if that's what we're doing, I feel like that's the other piece of this conversation. Those are two different points, but.
Sorry, it just, I mean, hearing a lot of the conversations, I feel like I'm agreeing and I'm also disagreeing, and maybe I'm taking the scripture differently, and so please, help educate me or bring clarity. But I feel like there's a lot of talk about persecution, right? Bringing or following the cross is about you've done that if you've been persecuted, that sort of thing, and I don't know that that's really what it's saying. Like, I think it's about what I would call fizzy faith, right? Like, it's about you have your faith, but it's about having fizzy faith. Like you'd pour a pop can and it would fizz all over. It wants to explode, right? Like, and it's about having your faith that you want to explode and share with other people. And that can bring persecution, but it also might bring positivity, right? And I don't know. I mean, we talk about being nice and polite and that sort of thing. I remember talking to a minister once, and he said, "Well, being Christian is not being nice. It's about following Christ, and that can be hard, right? And the messages and how you bring Christ to situations is not necessarily being polite." Right. So I just wonder if it's going back, summarizing everything, that it's, again, not about looking back on your life and thinking, I've done it because look at what I went through. It's, I've done it because I followed Christ, and look at the good that's come through it, and look at the bad that's come to it. So, yeah.
I think you're pointing to the value isn't persecution. The value isn't suffering. The value is following Jesus. Yeah.
Let me give you an example, which I think you're getting at is, I was with a man last week with his mother who was dying, and my impression with him up to now was always a man who was not very Christian, right? His mother was, but he was not very Christian, and so when you're in this situation, like with my work, there's a place where we offer people to share a blessing, what I call a blessing prayer, a ritual would help people to let go before they die. And in this case, I hummed and hawed because I figured this guy would reject it, right? Because he just didn't feel like he was that type of person. But I actually put it out there, and so I took a risk. I said, well, normally in this situation, I often with people who are open to it, I share a blessing prayer to help in the transition from this life, the idea of bracing death and God's on the other side of the door and so on, right? Well, he caught me totally by surprise. He says, sure, I want that. Holy moly. It was totally different than but I had to lean into that discomfort, the cross, one could say, because I was anticipating rejection, right? So I ended up sharing my prayer, and he was so touched by it, right? And and I realized, oh, I'm so glad I took the courage to bear that little discomfort, right? So I think that's the gift when we risk leading in that. We discover these amazing things happen, where people, they experience God's presence through me and through the prayer, and we had a wonderful conversation then from that, right? So I think that's what you're getting at, right? Exactly. Yeah. And I'm sure all of us have many stories like that, I'm sure.
Yeah, those sounded like great positive things to end on. I'm kind of still stuck at the beginning of your sermon where you gave a list of different people going through different experiences of suffering and abuse and this sort of thing. And then in that, there's some sort of glory, perhaps, or like, granted, everybody goes through trials or tribulations, but if they're being created, and people are continually being placed in situations, whether it's larger scale things or individual smaller family things or whatever, then how do they sort of see their way through that in all these ways that people are describing as, well, it's for the greater glory of God, or there's purpose in, there's purpose in everything, true, meaning, but I'm just not quite seeing the, what people are supposed to, as Marie had been saying, you just keep kind of plugging away, standing up for yourself or pushing back or whatever it is to kind of try and make change, try and make people see things, that there were some false assumptions or there's written gossip or not gospel, the other way around. And then how do you sort of reveal the truth, like, so that people can see what things truly are for, like you mentioned, all the situations that other people have been through, or like people who are homeless or anything like that. You don't really know their stories, and there's suffering there, and it's only because, I'm sorry, I just don't have a really, I'm not sure if anyone else has seen the answer to that, because I think everyone here probably has pretty comfortable or privileged existences, and so I'm just thinking about it from other people's perspectives where there has been maybe a lot more suffering, like whether globally or individually, that kind of thing. So yeah, just looking for perspective on that.
Yeah, I mean, with those character sketches, I think what I was trying to do with that is say that what following Christ, what taking up your cross means, really, it is different for different people. And it really matters if you're privileged, and some of those characters were people that were upper middle class or whatever, and had a lot of privilege, I think. And then what does it look like in that situation? And others, like the Rosa Parks example there, are in a very different situation, and what it means can look very different. I don't know if that's helpful.
Yeah, I was just thinking, Kendall, in response to what you were saying, is we all had a different level of a playing field. Like Rosa Parks had much more challenges to get, to get on a bus than I would have, right? So how do we, now we're trying to level those playing fields and understanding that it's not level for everyone. The other thought that I just had, that Brent and I thought was interesting about the churches that didn't have Good Friday services, and just, that was an interesting thing, like how would that shape your faith? Is, life is only good and only good things happen, like, you can see where that might go. But
just to respond to that, sometimes they did have a Maundy Thursday service, but almost never a Good Friday service, and I just found that so interesting. Yeah. I mean,
Actually, like I grew up in the United Church. We didn't have Good Friday services, at least in the church I was part of. You did. Well, I'm glad. Well, that's good. Because I grew up at the United Church where it was just Easter, like Palm Sunday, Easter. Now, it wasn't like the extreme you're talking about. They tried to incorporate, Good Friday stuff into Easter. But when I went to my first Good Friday service and went through the whole, foot washing and just the whole dynamic, it was often a reliving of the last day or so. It hit me totally differently. And I said, there's something here which I have missed in my previous education around Good Friday and Easter.
in the Leader magazine materials that we sometimes use for worship, they did, I don't remember this year if they do that, but the Palm Sunday resources, often they'll put something in to look forward to Good Friday. And it's partly responding to that sometimes it's called Passion Sunday as well, so that you can put some Good Friday in there for those that aren't going to have a Good Friday service, right? So they do that.
Yeah, and again, maybe I'm not understanding it perfectly, but I feel like you're associating the tribulations that they're going through, homelessness, hunger, or imprisonment, or whatever the case may be. You're associating that with bearing the cross, and I don't think that's what this is saying. This is just saying that everybody is in different places, but how you follow Jesus, how you bear your cross will look different. So it's not about looking for the purpose in what's happening to you. It's what is your response? How are you living your life? I remember going to coffee with you, and we were talking work issues and stuff, and I was making comments about how, things are meant to be, I'm growing, and blah, 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 when will this end, that sort of thing. And you made a comment saying, well, we have to be careful as to how much we put on God, right? God is not saying, Chad, now you're going to be out of work for however long, or Johnny, you will be homeless for however long. That is not the cross. That's not the tribulation. It's we all live our lives. We all have our own environments. We all have privilege in different areas, but it's following Jesus. That is how we bear the cross, if I'm understanding it correctly.
And it may be if we are privileged, in being an ally in certain situations to those who have less privilege, or it may be in challenging systems, or it may be in, right. There's a lot of different things that can look like. But okay, this is about the last comment here.
Yeah. Sorry, just Chad, the comment about or you were giving the example of the woman who says if she's just nicer, if she just does this, things will change. So you're saying if people just follow Jesus, then their suffering or tribulation or whatever. Okay. Sorry, I just wasn't hearing it because I was thinking about some of the examples that Pastor Kendall gave, in which, the people in those examples were thinking, if they just did this, if they did that, which all sounded like wonderful things that Jesus would do, and so they were, in a sense, following Jesus, but they were ignoring the fact that they weren't able to change their circumstance, their situation, or stop their suffering, or whatever was happening to them, abuse or whatever, that kind of thing. So they're doing their part, but it almost was like that wasn't being recognized as...
So I think the problem there might be my examples and how I set them up. They're good examples, but I like in that one I was saying what I wanted to say with that maybe following Jesus means standing up in that situation to the problem, not letting those internal voices. But anyways, we are out of time. Next week we get to talk about the cross a bit more, but not in Sunday school. So Sunday school next week, we are having a town hall, and it's specifically about and responding to and updating the congregation on the motion that came to the congregational meeting in October about that tasked the council with working at what the specific motion was about was creating a symbol or sign of our welcome as a congregation. So the town hall will be a place to hear more about what has happened around that and to ask questions and respond to that. So that's next Sunday during this time.
So the inclusion team will be there? Just clarifying too. So we have an inclusion team that was established, correct? And they will be present as part of that. So that'll be exciting to hear from them.
Yeah, they will be doing most of the sharing around what's been going on. Mike will lead that process during that time. So thank you.